Okay, let's just dive right into this. We're talking about something that's literally never happened before, the capture of a sitting head of state by the United States military. This isn't just a news story, it's an event that could reshape international law, global markets, and the very meaning of national sovereignty. And right after the operation, President Trump didn't mince words. He was incredibly upfront about the economic angle here, pointing directly to Venezuela's massive oil reserves as a key part of the plan. So, how did we even get to this point? Well, it didn't happen overnight. You can see the buildup right here. It really started heating up after a disputed election back in 2024. Then, the U.S. started these military strikes on ships off the coast, saying they were smuggling drugs. The pressure kept ramping up, with the seizure of an oil tanker, and it all culminated in this stunning raid that ended with President Maduro in U.S. custody. So, the big question is, how did they pull this off? This was an incredibly complex mission. Let's go inside the raid itself, an operation that some say was meticulously planned for decades. And here's the breakdown. This wasn't just a simple ground assault. First, they hit the city with a massive cyber attack, plunging huge areas of Caracas into total darkness. That gave them the cover to fly in undetected and take out key air defense systems. Only then did the elite Delta Force operators hit Maduro's compound, and get this, they had him and his wife in custody in less than 5 minutes. The sheer scale of this is just hard to wrap your head around. We are talking about more than 150 aircraft, bombers, fighter jets, drones, all launched from something like 20 different bases and ships. It was an overwhelming show of force. One officially even called it a spectacular assault like people have not seen since World War II. Just incredible. Okay, so how on earth does Washington justify an action like this? As you can imagine, the White House has a very specific story, a legal and moral case that frames this whole thing not as an act of war, but as a law enforcement mission. The entire official case, the legal backbone for this, hinges on a federal indictment, and the main charge is narco-terrorism conspiracy. U.S. prosecutors claim that Maduro's government was essentially giving cartels a free pass to move up to 250 tons of cocaine through the country every year. That's the legal justification for what they're calling a judicial extraction mission. And to really sell this to the American public, President Trump came out with this absolutely staggering claim. He was trying to directly connect those vessel attacks we saw back in 2025 to saving an enormous number of American lives from drug overdoses. But, well, PolitiFact rated that claim pants on fire. Because when you actually run the numbers, the story starts to fall apart. Trump's math implies that those 32 boats were somehow responsible for 800,000 deaths. That is almost 11 times the total number of U.S. overdose deaths in an entire year. On top of that, most experts will tell you that Venezuela is actually a pretty minor player in the drug routes that reach the U.S. As you can imagine, the second this news broke, the world just reacted. We saw immediate shockwaves rip through global financial markets and political capitals. Everybody was scrambling to figure out what this new reality was going to mean. And no surprise here, right? The moment there's major military action, defense stocks go through the roof. We saw big jumps from major arms makers in Germany, Japan, and the UK. The markets were basically pricing in a much more volatile and dangerous world. And hey, remember what President Trump said about oil right at the beginning? Well, Wall Street was definitely listening. U.S. energy companies, we're talking Chevron, Exxon, Halliburton, all companies that are perfectly positioned to jump into Venezuela's huge oil industry, saw their stock prices leap. Politically, the world basically split right down the middle. On one side, you had key Latin American neighbors like Brazil and Colombia who came out swinging, strongly condemning the move. And you can see why, right? There's a long, painful history of U.S. intervention in the region. U.S. rivals like Russia and China, of course, piled on. But on the other side, it was a very different story. European allies were much more quiet, expressing concern, but stopping short of any real criticism of Washington. So that's the big question, isn't it? Maduro is in U.S. custody. Now what? A massive precedent has been set, and we all have to figure out what this means for Venezuela and, honestly, for the rest of the world. And really, it all boils down to this one central question. Was this a legitimate extraction mission to bring a criminal to justice, or was it a massive, blatant violation of the laws that are supposed to govern how countries deal with each other? From a purely legal standpoint, many experts are saying the U.S. case is pretty shaky. They're pointing out that this looks like a clear violation of the UN Charter. It wasn't authorized by the Security Council, and drug trafficking just doesn't meet the legal bar for an armed attack that would justify self-defense. And then there's that comment about oil. That brings up the Hague Convention's ban on pillaging, which is basically looting a country's resources during a war. It's a serious charge. Meanwhile, back in Venezuela, things were chaotic. Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, stepped up as the interim leader. And her first message to the world was pure defiance. She insisted there is only one president in this country, and his name is Nicolás Maduro Moros. But that defiance didn't last long. When you're staring down the barrel of what President Trump was calling a potential second wave of even bigger military strikes, your options are limited. Suddenly, Rodriguez was offering to collaborate with the U.S. administration, a huge potential shift. And so that's where we're left, with this really unsettling question. The U.S. has captured a foreign leader and openly said it plans to get involved in that country's resources. When one nation can just decide to run another, what's the price? What's the price for national sovereignty, for global stability, for the balance of power? That's a price the entire world is going to have to figure out now.